Good afternoon, everyone. How are you? I'm going to adjust this a teeny bit. So I hope you're enjoying your day. So I like to talk a lot about healthy living, healthy eating, even eating a plant-based diet. And so I thought I'd come on and share with you a few reasons why it's so important to me and why I talk about it so much. And what I'm going to be sharing may be some things that you may not have thought of before, or haven't looked at your food in this way. So I'm hoping that by sharing my ideas and my thoughts with you, then it can expand your thinking too and encourage you to eat more real food. So one of the foundational pieces of having a very healthy, long life is all about what you put into your mouth. Hey, thanks for tuning in. So the question then becomes, is it real food that nourishes you, that brings you greater life force? Or are you eating what I call a lot of fake food, a lot of processed stuff? And when I'm talking to people about this, then there's a phrase that I came up with that I like to share with people, and it does kind of catch their attention, and it's intentional. And so that is the phrase, fake foods produce fake people. Or pretend foods produce pretend people. So what do I mean by that? Are you a pretend person? We don't like to think that we are, and yet let me explain what I mean by this, because it all comes down to chemistry and what you put into your mouth. So the typical standard American diet, which we know is very death-inducing, disease-inducing, when you look at it, it's so broken down and processed. Say, for example, a wheat kernel or wheat. The bran has been taken out of it. All of the nutrients have been removed from it so that it's just starch and empty calories. When you look at stuff that's put in a package, so oftentimes that food's not even recognizable anymore. What started out maybe as cauliflower may resemble something else when it's done with it, now that it's in a frozen dinner for you. So when you look at also fast food, you don't know what's in them. We know, though, that there's a lot of chemicals in the food, in the processed packaged food. There's artificial flavorings, artificial colors, which when you look at the word artificial, what does that mean? It's fake. Therefore, it's fake colors, fake flavors, fake foods. That's why I call it that's fake food. There's also a lot of preservatives. There's a lot of flavor enhancers. By the time a lot of the food gets so processed and broken down and then put into these packaged and frozen dinners, there's no flavor to it anymore because there's no life. The life force has been removed. And so they have to add in fake flavors, add in flavor enhancers to give it, and salt and sugar, to give it an appeal so that you'll eat it. A lot of these chemicals or flavor enhancers are known to be very addicting, so that you'll eat more of those foods, you'll buy them more, you'll line the pockets of the food manufacturers at the expense of your health. It's all by design. And also, when we look at what are these chemicals doing in the body, how is our body responding to them? How does the body break them down? Can the body even recognize those chemicals or that food stuff by the time it's been processed? And more often than not, it can't. And so it creates a lot of acid, a lot of inflammation, a lot of bloating and irritation in the gut. A lot of those chemicals, like glyphosate and preservatives and the pesticides, there's a lot of residue on those foods that end up in the gut. And that contributes to irritation, food allergies, leaky gut. And once your gut starts leaking, or meaning the spaces between the cells of your intestinal lining, once that gets compromised and there's spaces between there where the food can ooze out into the abdominal space and eventually into blood where it doesn't belong, then you're setting yourself up for a massive amount of problems. But that's another story for another day. So getting back to the chemicals, of the chemistry of how processed foods interact with the body. Number one, the body has a hard time even recognizing it. And there's no life force in there, meaning there's no electrical signal. There's no energy. And then the body has to draw upon its reserves in the bones and other tissues in order to even break that thing down and process it. So rather than the meal giving you energy, your body's actually losing energy by the time it processes it and digests it and then being able to eliminate it. So another thing that happens then in the gut is with all this fake processed food, and I will add a lot of excess animal products, is with all of these chemicals, then it changes the microbiome, meaning all the gut critters, the bacteria. It changes the nature and the quality of those bacteria so that they adjust and adapt to whatever their environment is. So the big question is, what kind of environment are you giving and providing for your gut microbiome? Is it life-enhancing or life-detracting? So if you're giving your body, your gut, your microbiome a lot of foods that are empty calories, don't have a lot of nutrition, a lot of sugar, salt, sodium, starch, a lot of inflammatory making foods, then your gut bacteria is going to shift their function and their form accordingly. So what does that do? It makes for a more acidic environment, and then the waste of the bacteria contribute to the acidic environment, and then you've got problems there. And it also affects your moods. It affects your biochemistry, your hormones. And so not only do you become addicting to these chemicals in the foods by design, they affect your moods, your energy states, your clarity of mind. So have you guys heard of Dr. Joe Dispenza? Let me know in the comments if you have. He has done a lot of study and research on neuroscience, among other things, and a lot of what the body, how the body responds chemically to different things. So whenever we feel an emotion, we feel it because the body's making a chemical. Okay, that's very important to keep in mind. So when you have a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, a lot of trauma, a lot of fear, a lot of anger, a lot of just response to everything that's going on this year, which is a lot. Makes people crazy, makes me crazy. But the body makes chemicals to all of those things. Thank you. The body makes chemicals in response to all of those emotions. And then we feel like, for example, anxiety. So we get into this loop where we're eating foods that have chemicals that encourage the state of anxiety, encourage the body to make the chemicals of the emotion of anxiety and stress. Then we have experiences and conversations with people around us, which we then respond to in a stressful, anxious, angry way. And if we're not able to metabolize or recycle out those chemicals, if the liver's not able to break down those chemicals of, say, anger, anxiety, fear, stress, whatever it is, the thing that you're feeling, then that chemistry, those molecules start to circulate in the body, in the blood. And so you get locked into this emotional loop. You follow that? So you have conversations and experiences that reinforce the chemistry in your body of how you're feeling. Then you grab for foods, comfort foods most often, to help soothe the anger, to help soothe the depression or the stress or the boredom. Foods that we've been taught from childhood to look towards for emotional soothing and support. The thing is, oftentimes those are the very foods that contain the chemicals that make us addicted to them, that contain all of these other chemicals that affect our microbiome and our moods. And so all of these different things, factors together, keep us locked in to this loop of responding to our life and people and things around us in a stressful, angry, depressed, anxious, fearful way. Okay? And if you're not able to break that loop, and shift the chemistry of your body so that you can feel differently, if you don't have tools of like meditation or knowing how to shift your energy to get out of that mood, that feeling state, then you're stuck in it. And then over time, let's say weeks go by and you're still not able to resolve the thing that got you upset in the first place. And your body is still continuing to make the chemicals of the anxiety, the stress, the anger, the depression, the upset, whatever it is. That starts to become a habit. And then over time, even more weeks and months go by, that becomes your norm. And so that's how, then you start to think, well, that's just the way I am. I'm just pissed off. I'm just an angry person. I just have anxiety. I'm just depressed. This is just me. So we start to make that emotional chemical state our identity. Okay? We start to identify that and call ourselves anxious, depressed, stressed, whatever. And so my question to you is that really the truth of you? Are you really anxious? Are you really depressed? Are you really fearful? Is that your identity? Is that who you are? It's not. It's just an emotional state, a chemical state that your body is in, that your nervous system, your hormones got stuck in, and it's stayed in that stuck state long enough that you forgot that it's not normal, that you forgot it's not you. And so you begin to identify it, and then you choose foods to support that state, chemically, emotionally, energetically. Do you follow that? So when I say pretend foods produce pretend people, that's exactly what I mean. We choose foods to reinforce our chemical, hormonal, emotional, energetic state of how we're feeling in response to our life, and it becomes embedded till it becomes a habit, and then we identify it and think that's who we are. And whenever you establish a sense of identity like that, your body responds and produces that state accordingly. So what do I mean by that? Let's say you've been going down this road of feeling anxious, depressed, fearful, stressed, whatever the thing is, and you've been feeding yourself your comfort foods, your favorite foods, fast foods, high animal product, cheese, processed, packaged, fake foods to reinforce and help you feel better, but yet it's just only made you addicted to that. Over time, the tissues of your body are going to break down, because that's what they've been fed with your energy, with your thoughts and emotions, with your food. And so your body responds and reflects that identity, reflects that state of being. Pretty soon you've got stuff creeping up like aches and pains or inflammation. Acidic acid builds up, whether it's in your joints, in your tissue, in your muscles, in your gut, affecting your digestion, in your brain, affecting your cognitive clarity. Then if that's not addressed, if you never clean that out, if you never shift out of that loop that you've been stuck in chemically, energetically, emotionally, the body follows. The cellular function starts to break down. It starts to respond to the environment that you've created for your cells. They can't function very well. They can't receive the nutrients and nourishment that they need because you're not giving it to them. The environment that they swim around in, the waters, our body is 70% water. All of our cells swim around in this aqua, liquid, fluid, watery substance called ground substance. If that environment, that watery fluid that our cells swim around in, is filled with a lot of acid, a lot of cellular metabolic wastes just from living life, the lymph system gets stagnant because it's the lymph's job to flush all of that out. That's why we need to move our body and exercise. But all of that starts to create a stagnant, inflammatory, acid-filling, stressful state within the tissues. And then things break down. The function of the cells break down. They can't communicate with each other the way they know they need to in order to carry out their functions to keep you running, like your heart beating or your blood pumping, your cognitive functions, your muscles moving. You follow what I mean? So the body will express how you've come to identify yourself based upon the chemistry of your feelings and the chemistry of the foods that you eat. So I encourage you to think about that for a bit. What are you eating? How are you supporting yourself? How are you feeding your cells? Is it with real food that's got electrical life force energy in it? Or is it to support these loops that we get stuck in of the fear, the trauma, the angst, the anger that everybody's so stuck in this with everything that's going on this year? How do you get out of that? So that your body doesn't break down, so that you don't start to identify with that state of being, which is not true of who you are. You are not depression. Your name is not depression. Your name is not anxiety. Your name is something else. You as a being, a spiritual being, having an experience in this physical body is not depression. The spiritual being that you are is not anger and anxiety. That's just an experience. It's a waveform, it's an energy that your body has picked up and therefore made chemicals so that you can feel and interpret that energy called anger, called depression. But that's not who you are. So how do you eat in a way that supports who you are? By giving your body real, whole foods, plants, things that the earth has made, not from a manufacturing plant owned by a corporation loaded with crap to make you ill so that they can make money off of you. Get that straight. You eat plants from what the earth has produced and provided. The roots, the tubers, the nuts, the seeds, the fruits, the vegetables. And yes, fruits. People get all twisted about the fruits, about eating fruits and the sugar when they don't understand that the fructose in sugar and the sugar in manufactured refined sugar are two completely different chemicals. The body processes them very, very differently. So you eat real food. We are first and foremost electrical, energetic beings before we are physical bodies. Our physical bodies, the cells of every cell in our body reads energy signals. It's designed to do that. There's a gazillion different energies, frequencies around us that we pick up. You know, the emotional energies just being one of them. But there's energies and frequencies that the cells pick up from the sun, from the environment that we're in, from the conversations and energies of the beingness of other people. You know, everything in our environment, our cells are reading those frequencies, reading those signals. The cells are reading the signals, the frequencies of the type of food that you give it. So if you're giving it dead food, lifeless food, fake food, the frequency is so low that the body can't hardly do anything with it. It doesn't support the functioning of the body. So when you're eating real food, like an apple or an orange or an avocado, it has a lot of life force energy in it, meaning there's a lot of frequencies in there that are still intact. And so when you eat it, the cells of your body can read those signals, can read those frequencies and know what to do with it. And so the frequencies are dispersed throughout the body and end up in the cells where they are needed. And then the cells say, oh, here's a frequency of vitamin A. Here's the frequency of vitamin K. Here's the frequency of sodium. Here's the frequency of calcium, of boron, of potassium. All of the vitamins and minerals are frequencies. The antioxidants that are free radicals that we get from berries that everybody knows we need to have, they're frequencies. So I encourage you to start to learn about energy and frequency and start to think in terms of frequency, because that's how we actually operate. It's how the body actually functions. If you're not giving your body the correct frequencies it needs, its functioning is compromised. If your body, let's say your brain has been covered with a plaque of aluminum, of mercury, of heavy metals, those are also frequencies. They're very low frequencies. They're very damaging frequencies that go contrary to life. They are frequencies that support destruction as opposed to life. So when your brain is coated with those frequencies of that aluminum, how is it going to function? It's compromised. That's one of the things that contributes to Alzheimer's. We know this. Aluminum on the brain, too much of it for too long of a time, is a direct contributor to Alzheimer's. And so where do we get the aluminum from? It's from the food, and from vaccines, and from drugs, and from flu shots. All the stuff that the medical establishment wants to fill your body with, there's aluminum in everything. Iodized salt is caked with aluminum. So that's just one example. So there's frequencies in everything. It's all frequency. Everything in this material world is frequency first. Your pillows, your cars, the house you live in, the plants, they are first frequencies of energy. And so when you're eating plants, eating real food, you're bringing certain frequencies into the body that it requires in order to run correctly, so that it can read and pick up those frequencies. Got it? So let's say that you have an area of your body where the functioning has been compromised, where there's too much inflammation and acidic buildup, and let's say that it's even starting to mutate incorrectly. A tumor starting to grow. So what's happened in that area is the cellular function has broken down, and the communication between those cells and its neighboring cells is also broken down. So you've got the communication the signals coming to the cells, as well as what the communication that the cells give out. That's compromised. So it's affecting the neighbors. So when you've got these cells that have forgotten how to function because they haven't been receiving the nourishment that they need, what that means is they've not been receiving the correct frequencies that they need in order for the mitochondria to run, for the DNA to read what they need to read, for all of the different little organelles inside the cell to run properly. they haven't received the right instructions via the frequencies. Because the type of frequencies that they've been given is frequencies of pesticides, of artificial coloring, of artificial flavoring, of excess fat, of trans fats. They've been receiving the frequencies that produce breakdown rather than proper functioning. Okay? So then when you eat food, like eating an avocado or a strawberry, that has the correct frequency of what that area of those cells need, then it's carried into the blood to that area. And let's say that the frequency was needed, like, for example, vitamin C and vitamin A. And let's say it needed calcium. Whatever the nutrients are on that food. And so it goes to that area. Again, the frequencies are available now for that cell to receive. And the frequencies of the nutrients act like tuning forks. Y'all know the concept of tuning forks, yeah? So you have, or even like on a piano or a guitar, you've got the tuning key that strikes it, that puts out a particular frequency. And then the other cells or the other notes in the area tune to that frequency, and it vibrates harmoniously, making the keys of the piano or the key of the guitar in harmony, in key. Same thing with your body and with the nutrients that you're giving it. So the frequency of vitamin C, the frequency of calcium, or whatever those nutrients are, the frequency of the antioxidants, come to the cell that's malfunctioning. And like the tuning fork, it helps this malfunctioning cell come back into resonance and correct vibration. Okay? And so over time, if you continue feeding your body correctly with real foods, then these cells that have been malfunctioning start to get this constant stream of correct frequencies, of correct nutrients, so that it can remember how to function. Or when it's ready to divide, the daughter cells are receiving the correct frequencies so that they know how to function. Or if the lifespan of that cell is done, if it needs to just go the way of all things, then it does that too. But the more you bring in correct frequencies to the area that's compromised, then the more that corrects the cell, as well as all of the neighboring cells where the communication got awry of the sending and receiving. And so you're benefiting the whole area of that tissue. Okay? So, hey, thanks for tuning in, everybody. So that just leads, again, the importance of why you want to eat real food, so that you can support your body energetically so that they receive the correct signals of how to function, rather than the frequencies that cause cellular degeneration. Now, another thing that I want to touch on too is, so how do you know what foods to eat that will support the malfunctioning, the cells that need help? Have you guys heard of the Doctrine of Signatures? Give me a thumbs up if not. This is a body of work that originated from the Western culture, the ancient wisdom of Western culture. Every culture has its wisdom. Like in China, we've got the Chinese medicine, and that has a whole plethora of herbs and foods and how to eat and what and for why. And then in Ayurveda, the tradition in India, they have their whole system as well. Every indigenous culture is going to have their wisdom of how to eat. In the Western world, because of our arrogance of ignorance and political agendas and grab for money and power and all that bullshit, a lot of the wisdom of the ancient Western world was lost and destroyed. So in Europe, in Greece, Rome, Italy, Egypt, all of those ancient cultures of the Western world, you can still find them, the nuggets of wisdom, but you have to kind of look. And you've got to know what you're looking for. And so then you've got to cross-reference to say, okay, well, this is what this culture said. This is what that other culture said. Then together you can combine, or you can build this body of knowledge of how they did things. And so the Doctrine of Signatures is one of those bodies of work that has been re-established, recompiled, that drew upon a lot of the wisdom of the ancient Western culture. Thanks for tuning in, you guys. And one of the teachers that I follow, his name is Tyler Tolman. Have you guys heard of him? Great guy, very knowledgeable. His father, Don Tolman, I think back in the 70s, 80s, several years ago, a few decades actually, he went around and really spent a lot of time, countless airfare miles, looking at the records and what all of these ancient cultures did to how they cared for themselves. And so he was able to piece together this body of work called the Doctrine of Signatures. So what that says is that when we look at a food, and this is how people in ancient times assessed what food would help what health condition. So they'd look at the food, let's say carrots, and they'd meditate on it, and they'd cut it up, and they'd, if you cut it crosswise and you look at the round part, and you've got to see all these little circles, kind of like the rings of a tree. They would look at the plant, where it grows, how the leaves form, how the plant develops and unfolds. And they would really tune into the plant, into the consciousness and the energy of the plant. Yes, it has consciousness. Everything alive has consciousness, and you can communicate with it. And this is what a Doctrine of Signatures is founded upon, is the communication, the information extracted from the knowledge, the frequencies of plants. So back to the carrot. So you cut it in half, or cut it crosswise, yeah, and you can see all the different rings and the circles in there. And so they looked at that, and it's like, wow, that looks like an eye, the iris. And so they deduced from that, well, carrots would be good for the eyes. They've got the frequencies that the eye needs in order to function correctly. And so they tried it out, and they developed systems of how to use carrots for the eyes. And now modern science can validate that and say, yeah, with all the beta carotene, we know that that's really good for the eyes. Another thing is, let's say, the pancreas. Its job is to regulate blood sugar and insulin and glucagon and a few other digestive enzymes, but it's easy to get out of whack because of our crazy typical diet that's loaded with garbage and too much sugar. And so when you look at a sweet potato or a yam, it's shaped very similar to the shape of the pancreas. And it's got a lot of nutrients in it, frequencies again, that are very beneficial for the pancreas, to help the pancreas remind itself, oh, this is how I'm supposed to be functioning. This is how much insulin I'm supposed to be making. So we can follow the system of the Doctrine of Signatures, and I'll give you a couple more examples, to help us understand what to eat for what condition. So if you've got something with your bones, if they're all awry, if they don't have, if they're brittle, porous, then celery is very similar in structure to bone. It snaps like a bone, and it has the same percentage of intercellular sodium within the celery, which is about 23% sodium, which is what the bones need in order for them to grow strong and do their thing and function well. Okay, what's another example? Grapefruit. When you cut it in half and you see all these little teeny little, I don't know, whatever you call them, bubbles that contain all of the juice, you know, inside the pulp. When you pick it apart, you see all these little droplets or these little oval thingies of where the juice is contained. When you look at the breast tissue, it's very similar in structure. And so from that, from the ancient wisdom plus current science, that we know that grapefruit, citrus fruits are extremely beneficial for the breasts and the lymph system. Grapefruit juice, lemon juice is one of the very best to help flush the fatty buildup and toxins and garbage and waste out of the lymph, which the breast is part of that system. Okay. Another example with the brain. We know that the brain is mostly fat and it runs on glucose. And there's not a lot of things that will cross the blood-brain barrier to really reach the brain. Essential oils, by the way, do that. And when we look at foods, what foods are going to really support and feed and nourish the brain that has equal or comparable fat content? It's one of the things we look at. So when you look at a walnut, when you take away that, so a raw walnut off of the tree is inside a very hard shell. And then when you break that open, then there's this dark brown little crusty covering thing that you got to peel away. And then you get to the actual walnut. And then when you see it, before it's all cut up, then it's got all these little ridges, and it's got like a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere equal to the same structure of the brain. And then it's got this little, I don't know what you call it, like a tissue thing that separates the two sides of the walnut down the center, the same way that our brain is structured. There's a tissue that separates the left and the right side hemispheres of the brain. So that's another example. So when you need to strengthen and feed your brain, then load up on nuts, especially walnuts. So there's a whole body of work, a whole science to that. But my point is, when you understand the science of food, when you understand whole foods and understand things in terms of frequency, then you can look at what foods are going to strengthen what areas of the body that need support, that need extra cleansing, that needs to be able to flush out the acid and inflammation and being able to rework itself so that the cells are functioning correctly. That's what healing is. That's what longevity is. It's cells that have a long life that function correctly because they have receiving the frequencies to help them know what to do so that they don't break down. Frequencies that are, we call them life force energy. So you eat the foods that strengthen a certain area of your body that needs strengthening. And likewise, you do the same thing for your emotional states. You know how I was talking earlier about how, you know, with all the insanity that's going on in the world right now, or this year of just like, we just all want it to end. But all of the confusion, the anxiety, the stress, the depression, you know, all of that, yeah, again, they're frequencies that and chemistries that the body is making. So how can you use food to help calm and soothe and mitigate some of those crazy frequencies, to help your body come back to balance, to make the chemicals of peace and calming, the chemicals of joy, the chemicals of gratitude, the chemicals that allow you to feel okay. We can do that with food too. And so when we do that in this instance, then we look at the colors of food. Again, the frequency. Within the food that makes the colors, for example, like with blueberries, let's just use the color of blue. within blue foods, there are certain chemicals, we call them antioxidants, that make the color or the pigment of blue, okay? And again, it's also a frequency. There's a frequency of blue. When you look at the light spectrum of the rainbow, each color has its own frequency. Red has its frequency, orange, green, blue. They all have their own frequency. So when the blueberry bush is making the blueberries, it's drawing out the color spectrum, the color of blue, the frequency of blue from the light spectrum to create the pigments to give it the color and the antioxidants, okay? And then likewise, when we look at the emotional range, there's been a lot of study done. I don't know if you guys may have heard of it or are familiar with it, but there's emotional states that we associate with colors. So, for example, yellow. It's a bright, sunshiny color. When we wear it, when we're around it, when we're out in the sun, what does it make you feel? Joy. You know, it lifts you up. It makes you happy. You want to go skipping down the road like a little kid. Okay. Red. What are the emotions that we associate with red? It can go either way. It can go into anger and destruction, or love and passion and deep enjoyment of something. Blue. That can go either way as well. So when you think of the emotions associated with blue, you can think of, well, if it's a heavy blue, a muted blue, then that can take you down into depression and heaviness and, you know, caving in on yourself. But when you look at the other end of the spectrum of frequency about blue, it's very calm and soothing and relaxing. Follow that? So when you look at the emotions, let's say you're spun out into anger, which is red. So you want to eat foods that support your body in breaking down the chemicals of red, the chemicals of anger, to shift that chemistry. So how do you do that? Again, you look at the color wheel, and let's say red is over here. What is the direct opposite color on the color wheel? It's green. So when you're feeling all anxious and it's spun out and you're having a horrible day and you're angry and all of that, eating a lot of green that day can really support your body and support your liver in breaking down the chemicals of that anger, so that the body can break down and recycle and eliminate the chemicals. And when that happens, it helps you get out of the loop of feeling the anger, so they don't just continue cycling in your blood and throughout your body, and then you're stuck in that emotional loop like I talked about earlier. Okay? If you're depressed, again, think of the color of blue. So when you look at the color wheel, what is opposite on the color wheel of blue? It's yellow. So if you're all depressed and down and out and feeling sorry for yourself, get out into the sun and go for a walk. Fill yourself with yellow frequency. Whether it's with food, whether it's with clothing, whether it's with crystals, whether it's just getting outside in the sun. That will help shift your frequency, shift the energy and your biochemistry, so that you're not stuck in that frequency of depression. Okay? So there's a ton of different ways that we can use real foods to nourish us. And the more you understand frequency and you think of in terms of frequency, then it can open up a whole new world for you of how you can feed yourself, nourish yourself deeply in the way that the body is meant to be nourished, so that you're not stuck in all of the loops of the anger, the depression, the anxiety, of all of that stuff, the lower energy states that nobody likes to be in, and yet that is running rampant on the planet right now. So help yourself with all of that and eat real food. And when you do, you can feel more yourself. You can feel more of like, oh, I'm more enlivened. I remember what is important to me. I remember what I'm passionate about. I remember my goals and what I really want to do. You remember who you are, your real identity as a spiritual, energetic being. And your diet supports you in expressing that. Your diet of real food supports you in having a healthy body to hold who you are instead of who you think you are based upon what you've been taught to believe all your life, which is what I call the pretend personality, supported by pretend foods. So that's why I say going back to the very beginning, pretend foods produce pretend people. So stop being a pretend person and eat real food that uncovers who you really are. An energetic, creative, spiritual being. So, lots to think about. That's my share for today. Hope you take notes, listen to it again, pass it around. If you like this, then let me know. If you want to hear other conversations similar to this, then also let me know. And I'd like to hear from you. What about what I shared stood out for you the most? You know, what colors of food are you going to explore? How are you going to think differently about frequencies in your body and the frequencies of food? What has this sparked for you? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you'd like to know more or follow with more, then I have a newsletter that I send out to my friends that contains a lot of juicy tips like this. So if you'd like to be on it, then hit me up and I will get you onto my newsletter where you can receive more tips like this. All right, so I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Give some thought to the frequency of how you're supporting yourself with real food. And I'll talk to you soon. Take care.